want to welcome everybody to JFK Live and our special guest, Gary Shaw, who we're looking forward to talking to very much. This is probably the only venue in the country where we're not talking about the conviction of the former president. And let's keep it that way. Larry, how are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, good. And this evening's show is in part set up by Dan Storper, who invited Gary to come on the show, and I thought that was a great idea. So maybe you can start us off, Dan.
Sure, happy to do it. Well, welcome everybody. I haven't known Gary really that long. It's only been about 8 years, but I've really gotten to know him and have been so impressed by his incredible work and legacy over the decades, going back to the 60s when he started researching. And one of the things I'm most impressed about is the combination of the fact that he's been a professional architect, so he's actually quite organized. So when I ask him about stuff, he can actually find it compared to some of my friends in the research community. He also has a sense of humor, and one of the great guest bedrooms that his wife Karen so carefully organizes and keeps very comfortable for visiting guests. So I'm really appreciative to Gary. He's been a great source, and I thought we could begin by just basically having him give his introduction into how he got into the case, his Dallas connections, Carousel, Jack Ruby, etc. So Gary, you want to get started? And by the way, we're going to keep the questions to the end, and we'll probably spend most of the second half of this gathering talking about his more recent work with admitted assassins. So we're going to start in the beginning, for Gary's JFK beginnings.
Okay, this goes way back to my senior year in high school here in Cleveland, Texas, and I belonged to a doo-wop group, a little singing group. And can you believe that, Larry? I'll hold up the picture so you'll see how.
Hey,
nice.
Gary, I don't know if I can't see you. I don't know if you can make yourself visible.
Your camera isn't on, Gary.
Oh,
Gary, I joke that I call myself a Jew-wop. I'm Jewish and Italian.
What do I hit, Jeff or Dan?
In the upper right-hand corner, if you click on the blue icon with 3 dots,
Okay.
You should get something that says "Ask to start video."
Speaker view, gallery view.
No, a more direct method would be the video button on the lower left. Just turn on your camera.
Yeah.
There should be a camera with a.
There he is. There he is.
Bob, do you have host abilities tonight?
I do. Alex is allocated, so I'll be showing some of Gary's work later on.
We can help.
There you go, Gary.
Okay. Here is the doo-wop group. I'm the handsome one there. Anyway, we sang backup for a rockabilly star by the name of Johnny Carroll, and you can Google him. He's quite popular as an icon of those early days. He wanted to be an Elvis Presley. He just didn't have the stuff. But we were invited to sing at the Texas Theater, believe it or not. This is late 1956 or early 1957. And we sang and backed up Johnny Carroll at the Texas Theater. After our part of the show, back in the dressing room, who should come in but Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby, believe it or not, one of his friends was a guy by the name of J.G. Tiger, real name Jack Goldman, but his theater name was J.G. Tiger, and he was the a manager of Johnny Carroll. And so he was back in the dressing room, and in comes Jack Ruby, glad-handing and smiling, and invites us over to the Ed McLemore Auditorium to sing for the American Guild of Variety Artists party. Now, if y'all know who AGVA is, well, you can imagine what a thrill it was to go sing for those folks. And so that was my introduction to Jack Ruby. I was a draftsman trying to learn how to be an architect at that time, and I was working under a bachelor architect from Cleveland, Ohio, by the name of Edward Kerber. And Ed was a bachelor, and he liked to go to Dallas. Cleveland's about 60 miles south and west of Dallas, and if we wanted to party, that's what we did. We went to Oak Cliff area of Dallas,
Really?
which was a nice area at that time. And so we would take him over at least once a month. And during that time, there were 3 theaters there in downtown Dallas. Jack's and Jack Ruby's club, the Carousel, and the Colony Club were across the street from the Adolphus Hotel. But right around the corner, about a block, was the Theater Lounge. And they staggered their shows, and we could make 1-hour shows, then go to the next place, and then the next place. We'd catch all 3 shows while we were over there and drive back home to Cleveland. So that was my attitude. He would come sit with you on the table, and he was always, a good guy to slap you on the back, how glad he was to see you, and spend some money. That's what he wanted you to do. And so that was my introduction. I didn't think a whole lot about that, of course, until later when he shot Lee Harvey Oswald. We knew who he was, and we'd always heard the scuttlebutt that he was mafia. Be careful with Jack Ruby. And so that was my introduction into the assassination. I never, ever thought I'd be spending a lifetime chasing this thing down, but that's what I've done. I'm 85 now, and I've been doing it since it happened. I began to read everything I could get. And of course, the Warren Commission came out. I bought the Associated Press version of the report and read it. And, but the thing that really turned me on to this whole affair was Mark Lane's book. I was a member of the Book of the Month Club. And so I got Rush to Judgment as soon as it was available. Paid $2 for it. And of course, reading that, I was hooked.
That was the hard copy, right? The $2?
Yeah, $2. Yeah. $2 was $2 back then. That's for sure.
Did you start researching it right away?
No, I didn't. I just started reading everything I could get my hands on. And one day, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram came to my door and with a issue of the newspaper, Sunday edition newspaper, and in it was a small article about this guy did book reviews weekly in the Star-Telegram, and he was reviewing Sylvia Meyer's book and Penn Jones's book, the second volume of his 4-volume work, and I found out he was 20 miles away from me, and so I headed over there real quick that next week and walked in, and he had Weisberg's books and Meyer's books and his books and sets of the Warren Commission, and I just loaded up. I bought the Warren Commission for $60, all 26 volumes. Sylvia Meyer's book, his books, Weisberg's books. And that was my introduction then into the.
What were you doing that you could pay $60 for the Warren Commission?
I was a draftsman.
God, that's a lot of money.
I made a.
So
And then, and then basically, after you had started reading, you started talking more to Penn and some other people. I mean, obviously there was a process by which you really started diving in and became interested in interviewing and started meeting people like Roger Craig and others in the Dallas area. So maybe you could give us a little background on that.
Well, at that time, at the time I started doing this, I was doing a lot of traveling, and so I would have to go to Dallas, Love Field, to fly out to some of the projects. So that allowed me to drop in Jones on the way there or on the way back or both. And he began to share things with me and introduced me to Richard Randolph Carr and Roger Craig and Mary Farrell. And that got me a real boost, so to speak.
And Gary, so you didn't believe the official story.
Absolutely.
What was your sense of what had happened, and what drove you? Where did your curiosity take you about the case if you didn't believe the official story?
At that time, at first, it was Jack Ruby. You know, I had heard, to me, that was a mob hit. You know, they silenced somebody that could, you know, may lead in other directions to other people
Right.
who were behind the assassination. But then when the Warren report came out, I'm a hunter, was a hunter, and I shot rifles and so forth from the time I was a child. I'm Texan, and I knew that the single bullet theory was the stupidest thing that I had ever come across. And so from that time on, as I read into the Warren Commission and so forth, I really kept looking for something that would convince me that Oswald did it. In fact, that Oswald did anything. And I didn't find it. And the more I traveled with Penn, and I sat and interviewed Richard Randolph Carr and Roger Craig and people like that, stumbled onto a lot of people. I didn't go looking for.
So if I could just interrupt, who was
Yes.
Richard Randolph Carr? That name doesn't mean anything to me.
Okay, he was one of the first witnesses. He was on the new county records. Was it the county records building? The new building that was under construction south and east of the Dealey Plaza. If you look at the old pictures, you'll see the skeleton, the steel skeleton of a multi-story building. He had gone up there to apply for work and was in the stairwell, which was open, actually, just the steel framework and the steel stairs.
Was Brennan working on the building Brennan worked on?
Beg pardon?
Remember Brennan, is that the building that Brennan was working on? He was
Brennan was working on a bank downtown, but they were working right behind the school book depository, and they were putting together some of the piping and ducts and such as that back there. But Richard Randolph Carr actually saw what Roger Craig saw. He's in the Warren, he's in the commission depositions. Read about him, Jeff. It's a good story, and he kind of backed up what Roger Craig saw.
Can we talk a little bit about?
Craig saw?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Gary, if you want to talk a little about Roger Craig, because he was an important figure. We talked about a bit with Steve Jaffe, because he spent a lot of time with Roger Craig. But
Roger came. Penn brought Roger over to my office right after he had testified down in New Orleans or gave a deposition or began speaking with Jim Garrison anyway. I don't recall. But he came back very nervous, and Penn brought him over to my office in Cleveland, and I interviewed him, taped him, got about a 30-minute recording of what he remembered of that day and other things. And I became not well acquainted with Roger, but well enough to know that, hey, here was a good old Texas boy who wanted to tell the truth and was getting beat around pretty good because he was doing it.
Yeah, the basic idea, though, was that he had seen the first rifle that was found, and it was determined to be a Mauser, not a Mannlicher Carcano, and he also saw somebody who looked exactly like Lee Harvey Oswald walking across to a green Rambler. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but
also, I think he's also the one that heard the couple, the guy that said he saw two people in the 6th floor. I think he's the one that reported that conversation as well. But just
He may have been, but the main thing that he saw and what he got in trouble for was seeing Lee Oswald, and he wouldn't back off from seeing Lee Oswald come across the lawn there toward Elm Street and get into a Rambler station wagon and take off. And that's not what the Warren Commission wanted to hear.
So
Yeah.
do you think that Oswald got in the Rambler and the whole story of Oswald getting on the bus and getting in the taxi is not true?
I do. Sure do.
did he talk to you about, was he deposed or interviewed by the Warren Commission, Craig? And if he was,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'll talk to you about how that interview went, because we have some people that have talked about the intimidation tactics they use, and they went off the record.
Well, it's been a long time since I've looked at that, Larry. But yes, he was he was intimidated by his boss, Decker, and others, and they wanted him to back off of that story because that didn't fit with their scenario. I don't know who got on the bus that they thought was Lee Harvey Oswald and did the taxi deal and all, because I think there were a couple of guys that were working in that area.
Uh-huh.
yeah. Can we, let's move on to the, we can have further questions later, but the Dr. Crenshaw collaboration, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wasn't looking for him either. He's one popped up. And, by the time that came along, we had opened the JFK Assassination Information Center in Dallas. Bud Fensterwall, Larry Howard, and myself with Larry Harris. And we did that. We wanted to compete with the 6th floor museum, which was opening at the same time. In fact, we were negotiating with the Daltex building 2nd floor at one time, and the city stepped in and nixed that. So we had to move down about 2-3 blocks to another location. But it was there that we got some publicity out of that. And a guy by the name of Jens Hansen had been writing with Dr. Crenshaw, Dr. Crenshaw's story. And he came in over at the center after reading about us and wanted to talk to me. And make a long story short, he brought Dr. Crenshaw over, and I was the first one to show Dr. Crenshaw the colored autopsy photographs. And he said, that's not what I saw, and that's what they were writing. But the publisher, which at that time was Signet Paperback, said, you don't have a long enough story. And so they wanted me to come in as the third partner. We split it 3 ways and assist them in filling in the details around. He was doing an hour by hour, minute by minute description of what happened those 3 days at Parkland. In fact, that was the original title for the book, 3 Days at Parkland. It was the people at Signet that came up with Conspiracy of Silence. So I filled in a lot of the details surrounding those 3 days at Parkland, and that's how that came about. When it came out, we were thrilled to death because right before it, in fact, the publisher moved our date up because of JFK. It was in the theater and was going crazy. People were, flocking to it, and it was something that gave impetus to our book. And within a few weeks after it was published in April, I guess, of '92, it went to #1 mass market paperback. And in May, last of May, that's when the Journal of the American Medical Association and the American Medical Association came after him full steam ahead. And that's another story, too lengthy.
So tell us that story, Gary. That's a
Well,
good story. What happened when the Journal of American Medicine went after Dr. Crenshaw?
Well, they called it, they said his book was a sad fabrication based on unsubstantiated allegations. And they said the doctors at the autopsy, Humes and Boswell and Fink and all of those was in disagreement. And all the Parkland doctors were in disagreement with what Dr. Crenshaw said. Because Dr. Crenshaw said definitely the throat wound is a wound of entrance. He had seen many of them. Parkland hospitals where they treated all the gunshots that occurred in and around Dallas. And he saw the cerebellum hanging out the back of his head and a big hole in the back of his head. And he helped wrap him up to put him in the coffin to transport him out of there. So he got a good look at that. He was doing the cut down in trauma room 1 of the leg. I believe it's the left leg. But
They even claim that he wasn't there, right?
oh yeah, they claimed they thought maybe he wasn't even there, even though he's mentioned about 8 times in the report and several times in the doctor's descriptions and magazines and in the newspaper. I mean, it was a farce, and but it was very damaging to them for a doctor who's the first one to really speak out. He goes on 2020 and tells his story, and it was a real knockdown for the Warren Commission, and they couldn't have that.
My recollection is he filed a defamation action, and either he won or he settled out of court with
We filed.
Okay, yeah.
So what happened there, Gary?
Well, we filed a suit against the American. We were dumb, Jeff. We filed against the American Medical Association, the Journal of American Medical Association. There were articles in the Dallas Morning News and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, so we filed against them. We filed against David Bellin, and I don't know, we had about 8 that we went after for libel because, you know, they were actually calling him a liar when
Right, yeah.
on paper he was telling exactly what the doctors, other doctors had said, and in writing on the day after the assassination or the day of the assassination. Anyway, that was a long, drawn-out affair. The first deposition I went to is our lawyer, which was Brad Kazaya.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
And we walked in, and he hears this one lone attorney and Gary Shaw and about 8 other attorneys looking down the barrel at us. And it went from there to worse.
But you did end up getting a settlement of some kind.
Yeah, we ended up mediation. The judge ordered a mediation, and we mediated. The day we were mediating, Dr. Crenshaw had the flu. He had fever and was just really, really a sick man. And when we got up to around $250,000, we finally agreed to settle for that. And a letter that they would publish written by Dr. Crenshaw in the Journal of the Medical Medicine. We didn't win real big, but we won.
But you won, but the truth won.
But
Yeah.
the truth won. That's right.
Let's
It
move along.
was a battle. It was a battle.
Yeah.
Don't ever ask me to do that again.
The JFK Assassination Information Center that you started, people started coming out of the woodwork. People like Chauncey Holt, William Bishop, and then Ricky White, and even Irv Davidson showed up one day. So maybe, is there any stories to tell about the JFK Assassination Information Center project?
I think it really bugged them. They were watching us pretty close. We had FBI agents I knew were FBI agents coming around fairly often, just snooping around. But the main thing we had, Dallas policemen were coming in and talking to us. Witnesses were, Hoffman, the deaf mute, he showed up at our place. to tell his story. One of the cops that was on the corner of Elm and Houston, who said the shots came from the nose, he shows up. Just all kinds of people like that. But then one day I'm there, and Chauncey Hope calls out of California, and he starts telling me that, about Operation Mongoose and the Bay of Pigs and his connection to Meyer Lansky and Peter Licavoli and all of this stuff, and how he was one of the three tramps. So the very next day after I talked to him, there was a news article in the Houston Post about another guy, some other writers who had found one of the three tramps down in Houston, and Charles Rogers was his name. So it was quite a time. We had Chauncey flew in, and I took photographs of him walking in the same pathway that the tramps took over to the sheriff's department, and my files were, by the time I quit talking to him, were probably 4 inches thick, and that's when Dick Russell, of course, wanted to interview him, and excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's when Chauncey actually went down to Houston, and a lady by the name of Lois Gibson, who was what do they call it, a forensic anthropologist, that took his pictures and him and the three tramp, and determined, in her opinion, this Chauncey Hope was the third tramp. I never felt comfortable writing about him, and that's a lengthy story we don't need to get into. William Bishop came along about that time. That's another story. Colonel Bishop, and it came about quite oddly. I was working at that time with Henry Hurt on his book Reasonable Doubt, and Henry would come down and spend a couple of nights and sometimes more, and we'd circulate around Dallas looking for people. And so I knew he was coming down, and my Rotary Club needed a speaker, so I had Henry Hurt speak. And of course, our little newspaper covered that front page. The next day, when the paper comes out, well, Colonel Bishop calls me, and that starts me on the trek of another quite interesting figure. You've probably read about him, but what's the guy out in California that bloody treason?
Noel Twyman.
Noel Twyman. He kept bothering me. He wanted to know what I had, and finally I just packed up my 4-inch thick file on Bishop and sent it off to him. So Noel Twyman and Dick Russell, who interviewed him in my dining room in Cleveland, and wrote about him.
And one of the interesting things, and Gary played me this tape, that Robert Morrow, I guess, was he the one who called Veciana with Bishop, or was it, I can't remember.
No, Morrow flew down when Bishop knew Coley real well and had a lot of Coley stuff and pictures, and Morrow was connected to Coley, Mario Coley. And so Bishop calls Morrow, and Morrow flies down. I've got pictures of he and Bishop together in my office here in Cleveland. And they talk about Veciano and all of the things that were going on. And so Bishop says, well, I'll just call Veciano. So I don't know how we found his number, but we came up with his number, and Bishop called him. And Veciano says, I'd have to see your face. I don't know whether you're bishop or not. I'd have to see your face. That's kind of the way that went.
Well, and that the interesting thing is that from that conversation and from the research that appears pretty evident, at least to me, was that essentially Veciana had two handlers named Bishop. He had William Bishop, who was more of an Army intelligence CIA guy, and he had Maurice Bishop, who's supposedly David Atlee Phillips, who was a CIA guy. And that's part of the confusion, I think, about the idea of Bishop and Veciana, or the idea of Veciana and some of his claims, because I think what's confusing is that there were two bishops. But again, that's another story. But William Bishop claimed to be involved in the assassination of Trujillo and other things. So he had a lot of interesting connections. Gary spent a lot of time with Bud Fensterwald trying to figure out who's real, who's not real. And I don't know if you ever came to the conclusion about William Bishop, but
Well, Alan Kent, I don't know whether you know Alan or not, has probably written as good a story on Bishop as I've seen. I've shared with him. Bishop gave me his card file from that period of time, and you wouldn't believe the names. He had the private phone number of people that you and I couldn't possibly have gotten a hold of, and so I furnished those to both Twyman and to Alan Kent. And
yeah, Alan Kent did an essay that's wonderful about.
So did you reach any conclusions, Gary, about was he involved in the assassination or not?
I couldn't, Jeff. The reason I didn't write about him is he was such a mysterious character. I never felt comfortable in, going out on the limb. I've gone out on a limb a number of times, but I never felt comfortable with he or Chauncey Holtz when that comes. I didn't write about either one of them because I didn't feel comfortable. Needed more information.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, can you go on and talk a little bit about your work with Bud on the French Connection, Jean Suetre, with Steve Revell as well, who just passed away, unfortunately, last week. Can you?
Well, that's an awful long story, but I'll give you the gist of it. Mary Farrell got some documents from Bud, a whole stack of CIA documents, and she gave me a document you could barely read, but it was a CIA document, and talked about John Suetre or Michael. It looked like Michael Hertz, but it turned out to be Michael Mertz, and Michael Rue. Using one of those three names, he was in Dallas and was at the time of the assassination, and he was suspicious and was ordered from Washington to be flown out of Dallas. A pickup order was given. He was flown out of Dallas within 48 hours of the assassination. That's a long story, but to make it as short as possible, I wrote about that because I think I wrote, is the FBI shielding an assassin, because we couldn't find any documents on the guy, and published that in the continuing inquiry, and I believe in November of '77. And I traced down a guy who's mentioned in the document, a Dr. Alderson, who was in Houston, a dentist. And I'd gone down to see him, and he gave me a photograph of Suetre. And so I wrote all that up and put it in the story. And then I had a long tape recorded interview with Alderson, and he's the one that told me the FBI came to see him immediately after the assassination, looking for Suetre. They had been monitoring, evidently, anything that came into this country from people like Suetre. And Suetre had written Alderson a Christmas card, and so they were tracing. Alderson was stationed with him in the Air Force. He was stationed in France, and he worked directly with Suetre at that time. They became buddies. So anyway, they come swooping in on Alderson, wanting to know if he had seen Swetra. This is right after the assassination. And he says, no, he hadn't. He said, well, he either killed the president or knows who did. That's what they told Alderson. And that took us, Bud and I, on a long trek.
And you did a lawsuit for FOIA relating to Swetra, Mertz, and Rue.
Yes, yes. I went to Germany. I went overseas not long after that, and I'm in Germany with some kinfolk. And Bud sends me a telegram. I don't know what he had learned, but I had planned on trying to go on down, and we'd found out that Swetra was down in southern France, and I was going to go see him. And he said, "Don't see him. I wouldn't be well received at that time." So I didn't go see him. But it was a long journey trying to figure out who this guy was. But it led me to Michael Victor Mertz also, that he was one of the names in that document. And that introduced us to Christian David, who was in prison in Georgia here in this country at that time. He was one of the drug-related criminals of that time. And that's where Steve Revell came in to being. I said, Steve, if you could get this guy to talk, he might know something. That took him on a long journey that didn't turn out all that well. I told him, I said, you turned right when you should have turned left when you were chasing that down. But that's another long story.
Well, the thing that's interesting, I mean, in Who Killed JFK, the Rob Reiner, Soledad O'Brien, they did name Jean Swetra as a shooter without much backup. And the Hank Albarelli, Leslie Sharp, and Alan Kent, the guy who wrote up the William Bishop story, named Swetra as one of the either assassins or assassination coordinators. So there's something there. And I've heard that from a couple of other sources.
He had the background and the ability to do that. He was known for that with the OAS.
Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about cover-up before we get to admitted assassin?
Well, there's not a lot to say. I decided to write a book. I've never written anything. If I had to write a paragraph when I was in high school, I hated it. But I tried my hand, and I had a lot of information that I thought I could put in a simple form. And so I told Penn, and I said, I need somebody to help me write this. And he said, I got a kid that's a journalism major. And I was introduced to Larry Ray Harris at that time. And so Larry and I put together Cover Up, which was, we were successful in not selling it real well.
Well, if you can buy it on Amazon for $550 if you'd like.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I looked yesterday or today.
It's not a bad book, from what I've been told. We covered a lot in a simple format, and telling the story about the assassination and the problems with the governments. I called it the governmental conspiracy to conceal the facts about the public execution of John Kennedy. That's a long subtitle, but I believe it even to this day.
Yeah.
But Penn Jones encouraged me. He signed one of his books to me. He said, write the book. You'll not make any money, but you'll sleep better. So,
well, there's
we're true.
There's the cover, and we're going to now move to the Rosco White story. So, Gary, there's a lot to talk about, some documents and photographs to show. I think maybe Bob should show the first photographs of Rosco in Geneva as Gary starts telling his story of Ricky showing up, and the rest is history.
Well, this is the book. I waited 30 years to put this on in book form. We had the information. I just never felt comfortable after what all occurred to Ricky and to some of the people surrounding this that we should write the book. But finally, if there's information, I don't know the truthfulness of the information. I know the truthfulness of Ricky White, and he didn't make all this up. The materials and the artifacts that he left behind, his daddy left behind, are very real and very what do you want to say? They couldn't have been made up by just anybody. And so Ricky White came to us at the center in about 1989, I guess, or something like that. And he told us the story about his father. And the story, as briefly as I can tell it, is that his father was a Dallas policeman. He had gone to work in October of 1963 with the Dallas Police Department. He was hired as an apprentice, and he went into the academy long after that. But he was with the Dallas Police Department and being paid from that time. That was the same month, within 10 or 12 days of Oswald going to work at the school book depository. They had been in the Marine Corps together, had gone over to the Far East on the same ship at one time. And
and they spent 3 months together in the same place.
Yeah, they were all over that area down there, but we've calculated they were in the same area, same place for about 3 months. These were different periods of time. But to make a long story short, Rosco knew Jack Ruby and got his wife Geneva a job as the cigarette girl or hostess, whatever you want to call them. She was not a stripper, but she denied that for several years to her boys and people who knew her. But then Time magazine published this photograph in 1988 or something like that, and that's her standing, pulling her skirt up in front of Jack Ruby, and pretty hard to deny that after all. And after that, and she began to talk to us and with Ricky, and Ricky, go ahead and put up the foot locker and those material. Well, there's where Ricky found the foot locker, in that shack behind his grandparents' home after his grandparents had died. And that's Ricky holding a canister we'll talk about in a minute. Go on to the next picture.
So Ricky is the grandson of?
He's the son of Rosco White, the son of Rosco White. And after the granddaddy died, they found Roscoe's footlocker out in that shack. And in that footlocker was all this material from the assassination of Kennedy, including a photograph of Oswald that had never been seen before at that time. It's the third Oswald photograph. And it's the only photograph, by the way, the authorities ever had that was from the original negative. Now, how he got that, your guess is as good as mine. But he apparently worked in the photographic part of the deal. And among those contents was also a diary. It's not shown in there because it was taken from Ricky in strange circumstances too. But the diary's contents were full of things about Roscoe's career. He had began journaling from the time he got out of high school and did so until his death in 1971. And a lot of it was about the things that he did in the Far East. There was an operation to London and things like that. He talked about all those maneuvers but never used any names. But then Ricky he's not a reader, very slow reader. And he finally got to a page and a half of description of what happened in Dallas. And November 22nd, 1963, and that's what set him off on this this long trek. Lots of things happened. There was a safe deposit box, keys, and bag among these materials here, and he wanted to find out what was in the safe deposit box. Go ahead, Jeff.
Where are these materials now?
They're with Ricky.
And where is the diary now?
The diary is unknown. It was obviously snitched from by an FBI agent who came to Ricky's house. It disappeared from that time.
So how do we know about its contents?
Ricky doesn't know all about the contents. He'd love to have it and read it again. But he and Tricia, his wife, read it over and over again, those page and a half, because they couldn't believe it. And they confronted Geneva, Ricky's mother, Roscoe's wife, about it. And she said, well, I'd never seen that, but I knew something was about that because I heard them talking about it, Jack Ruby and Roscoe talking about it.
Does he know the name of the FBI agents that would have taken it?
Beg pardon?
Does he know the name of the FBI agents that
Yes, yes.
Are they still alive?
It's a strange, you'd have to read it. It's convoluted, but let me just say this. Before they saw any of this, Ricky had gone to assistant DA there in Midland, where they live, Midland, Texas. And Midland guy learned about all this, and he went to the FBI. And the FBI then comes knocking on Ricky's door. Now, before they do that, though, they went ahead and started surveillance on him. We've got about 4 or 5 pages of surveillance where they followed Ricky and his wife Tricia wherever they went for their 2 or 3 days, and they hadn't seen anything.
You got that from FOIA? Did you FOIA?
Yes. And anyway, they come. Ricky and Tricia at work, and but they have a babysitter. Ricky had two little girls at that time. They come knocking on the door and tell the babysitter, call Ricky and get him back home. And Ricky comes back home, and they're standing out in the yard, and they show him a book where there's a $100,000 fine, possible 10-year prison sentence if he withhold information from the FBI. Scared that boy to death. And they make him pack all this stuff up that he has and take it down to the Midland FBI office, and they grill him for about 3 hours or more. And by the time they get through with him, he puts the stuff, he has to take all this stuff with him in a box. He puts it all back in the box and goes home and lays it on the pool table there in his rec room, and goes to the bedroom and lies down in the bed and starts crying. He's so upset with all of that. And he hadn't been in there long when the front door bell rings, and Tricia answers it, and it's the FBI guy again. And he said, I left my scratch pad in with Ricky's stuff. And she went to tell Ricky, but by the time she told Ricky, he was going back out the door, said, I got what I needed. And they never saw the diary after that. So you can believe that if you want to. I happen to know that Ricky's not a liar, nor is Tricia. And so that's as truthful as I can be on that.
These guys are still alive that we could interview them, allegedly, the FBI guy?
I'm not sure. One of them was this guy, Ricks, FBI agent. He was in charge of the stuff down at Waco when all of that took place. And I think he may have even been in charge up in Oklahoma when that bomb went off. So, yeah, he's still around. One of them was a guy by the name of Tom Ferris, and there were 2 or 3 others. But yeah, I'd love to get them on the stand.
Wow, that would be wild if they were alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the keep going, Gary. I think if Bob, if you go to the next, you'll see some additional material. So, Gary, you
Okay.
could also talk about what Ricky found years after the Foot Locker.
Yeah, one of the things that he read about in the diary was his father had left something behind. One was a safety deposit box. They went down to the safety deposit box and with the key, and of course, if you got the key, you get into the box. And so they opened up the box, and there was about it's kind of conflicting, but $200,000 to $250,000 in bearer bonds in this safe deposit box in Oak Cliff. And so they say, well, we can't let you have it till you bring a probated will down here, because the guy who is the owner of the box is deceased. And by the time they did all that, when they got back there, those bearer bonds had disappeared. The FBI had got involved in that. And so the FBI did write up that said that the safe deposit box had been purchased for $3,000. And you don't purchase a safe deposit box that I know of unless you've got a long-term use for it or something. But anyway, that's that story. But among those things that Ricky remembers is that there was a metal container that he watched his dad bury down at a cabin that the family had on Lake Whitney. And so he began looking. In fact, we went down there, and he had sold it before his death in 1971. So we went down there looking for it. We dug up the whole backyard trying to find this metal container that Ricky had seen, and didn't find anything. But on the way home, Ricky called his mother and said, well, look at Granddaddy's house in the attic. I know that they built this addition to the home back there, and he was in and out of that. And so Ricky found this metal container, canister, cylinder, waterproof, that was used by the Navy to actually put pistols in, and it would float. It was solid. And in that, he found these cables, these orders to Mandarin. And Ricky had learned from the diary that his daddy's code name was Mandarin, and two other guys involved with him. One was, his code name was Saul, and the other one was named Lebanon. And this picture right here shows my retyped version of what's on the right. The reason that is so messed up over there, Rosco had taken these three messages that he had received and laminated them between two pieces of plastic. And the plastic had turned very, very yellow and got, all this stuff on it. And that's the best copy we could make. But it's very specific. It says that Mandarin's foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged now. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood. And then it's signed off by C. Bowers. And at the bottom, it's RE rifle code 3A's, AAA, destroy and own. By that time, Ricky said he remembered seeing that RE rifle in some of his daddy's writings in the journal. And by that time, of course, we had heard about another rifle, ZR rifle. And so that kind of rang a bell with us. But these are in this canister, and Roscoe's dead in 1971 before all this information about ZR rifle has come out. So you really can't tie that into that. But the cables appear to have come from Navy intel. It's funny. By the way, Rosco White was discharged from the Navy and then re-upped. And then within a few weeks of re-upping for another 4 years, he asked for a hardship discharge, and just like Oswald, was granted it real quick, and he is assigned, sent to the Dallas area and assigned to the Naval Air Base there in Grand Prairie. And
You want to go to the next cable, Bob?
Hey, Gary, was that Saul the same Saul that Hugh McDonald wrote about an appointment in Dallas?
no, this was Rosco was dead in 71. Appointment in Dallas didn't come out till 75.
But when they refer to Saul, S-A-U-L, the same guy?
We
No.
don't know. We
Okay.
don't know.
So this is the next one.
Okay, this one basically the same format, but it says Dallas destination chosen. Your place hidden within the department's contacts or within this letter. Continue on as planned. I've two ex-CIA people have commented on these, and both of them, one of them was a chief of station at one time over in Africa somewhere. But they said they had seen messages like this. One of them came into the center and looked at this, and he was particularly interested in this one. He said, contacts are within this letter. And he surmised that there was some kind of code written into this letter, or, I guess it could have been a microdot or some other method of bringing those names out in this. Maybe it was just included in an envelope. I don't know, but he was very interested in that particular statement. Contacts are within this letter. He began to scribble something on a yellow pad, going to show me something, and he got so far, and then he got nervous and tore it out and wadded it up, stuck it in his pocket, and left. And he said, "I'll get back with you." He never did.
Do you know what NRC, VDC, NAC means?
Yes, but I couldn't tell you. It's naval, like NAC, I think is Naval Air something.
Naval Air Center.
Yeah, Naval Air Center. All of those are pretty common.
Okay.
Hey, Bob, why don't you go to the next cable, the third one?
Dan, if I could just throw this out, go back to that one. Go back to the one you just had. Notice the date there at the top says September 63. Remember, Rosco didn't start on the police department until October. But it says your place hidden within the department. So that's a little curious. Maybe,
Well,
he was destined to be on the department before he even knew it.
Thank you, and I'm glad you jump in. Please do. That's good. But one of the things, Rosco had made application to the Dallas Police Department earlier that year, and guess who signed off on him to get the job? Rosco had worked at Convair, and the security, the man in charge was a guy by the name of Mason Langford, and was with the ONI in Fort Worth and Dallas at that time.
And he reported directly to Rufus Taylor.
That's right.
The third
The NRC is the Naval Reserve Center, the Naval Reserve Center, the aviation, the VDC. I'm looking that up. I can't remember what that is, but they're all related to naval designators.
Okay, this is the third and final. This is after the assassination. This is in December, and it says stay within department. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouths. You know what to do with the mix-up. The men will be in to cover up all misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned. Wait for further orders. It's obvious that something had gone wrong in their plans, and there was a mix-up, and something needed to be done. In the Green Book, we'll talk about here in just a little bit. Rosco had handwritten this particular note, and it kind of applies to this. He said, he writes, 28 people have died in witness program. Take out the rest later. And then he signs his full name, Rosco Anthony White, to that particular
I think we
piece.
have a picture of that, right?
I'm not sure we do.
Yeah, we do.
We do?
Yeah.
This is the gun. We'll go back to that. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, this is in the Green Book, which Green Book was a scrapbook that Roscoe had put in the canister. He had pasted in pictures like this. It's an old dictation book from probably the 1920s. And he had taken this book, and many of the pages have been torn out, but he turned it upside down and he made a scrapbook out of it. He's got this photograph in there, and it says down at the bottom, he scribbled 7.65 Mauser, our gun used, killed President Kennedy, November 22, 1963. That's one of the first where he admits that he's involved in this operation. Next one. This was kind of strange. This is the Secret Service reenactment in Dealey Plaza before the Warren Commission came out. And it's funny, he just scribbled up at the top of it, lambs, like, this lamb was led to slaughter. But down at the very bottom, you'll see a whole series of writings, numbers. And we believe that has some message to it, but we're not smart enough to figure that out. But it appears on a lot of the pages.
And by the way, Gary's request, and Brian, is for anyone reading Admitted Assassin, if you have are able to identify any of whether they're photographs or numbers or codes, please get in touch with Gary. That's what they're hoping for. That's
the reason we put the book out, to be honest with you. We don't know what all's in it and what all could be found. We did find out one thing, and let me briefly cover that. After the book came out, we found out, I had assumed that I had researched it, that there's a masculine, what I call a masculine looking woman in one of the pictures in the book. And I thought my research led me to believe that it was a female impersonator that worked all over the country, but especially out of the Club My Oh My in New Orleans. And a guy named Harvey Goodman. He went by the stage name of Mr. Harvey Lee, which I thought, well, that's strange, and maybe why did Roscoe put that in there? Since that time, that masculine looking lady has been identified as Doris Duke. We have the actual news photograph that was taken from, and it's a 1941 newsprint of Doris Duke. If you don't know who Doris Duke is, she was the heir to the R.J. Reynolds tobacco, and she was the richest woman in the world. She was called the richest woman in the world at that particular time. But the thing that intrigued me is that she was married at one time to Rafael Trujillo's.
Porfirio Diaz. No, Porfirio Rubirosa.
Rubirosa. And he was alleged to be assassin. He was buddies with Johnny Abbes, who was one of those that worked with the CIA to try to kill Castro. Abbes was one of Trujillo's right-hand men. And
Gary, was Roscoe operating out of animus towards Kennedy, or was this was just his assignment? Like, did he?
This was his assignment. On his deathbed, he told his pastor, he said, "I have taken life on foreign and domestic soil, and I repent of it, and I wished I hadn't done it." He told Ricky the same thing with tears in his eyes. He said, "I did things that I thought was right at the time, but I know that they were wrong." And so that's part of the story also. But the Rubiroso thing is intriguing. He may have been one of the deaths, if he was involved at all in this, because he died in '65 in a one-car accident. Died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital.
By the way, Charles Small put in the chat that Doris Duke was in the OSS in '41.
Yes, She sure was.
Man.
Let's go to the next one. I think that
Okay, this what tie into the Clay Shaw, the New Orleans, and all. There obviously is some. This is just one of the two photographs that appear in the Green Book. This is Richard Russo, not Richard Russo.
Perry
Raymond Russo. And Roscoe's written over here on the right-hand side, up and down. It says, "Big Mouth, you talked after all." What that meant, I don't know. The other hand scribbles all around it, I couldn't decipher, but that one was plain enough that I could. And so he writes up at the top, "Trial doesn't surprise me." So that ties in. There's another page that actually ties into the Clay Shaw affair down in New Orleans also.
Yeah, Perry Russo was Jim Garrison's #1 witness that he was, that saw basically Lee Harvey Oswald, David Ferry, and Clay Shaw together talking about the assassination to come.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the overview. The book is really fascinating, and I think there's so much there that leads you to the conclusion that Rosco was one of the shooters. And let's be clear, he was embedded in Dallas police. He worked for naval intelligence, but he was also CIA. So he had a triple role. And he had obviously, based on his confessions and his conversations and his writings, killed a number of people both before and after the assassination. So he was apparently one of the people involved in taking care of some of the witnesses that had to be eliminated. The witness program, witness elimination list is what he called it. So that's that. And Jeff had to leave. So I don't know how, maybe Bob, you want to select people, I don't know if I can, who are interested in asking questions.
Yeah, people could put their hands up.
Larry?
Yes, at the bottom, if you have a new version of Zoom, you will see an icon at the bottom that allows you to react. Or if you have an older version, it says reaction.
Right. So meanwhile, Chad has his hand up.
So let's go with Chad.
Okay, hi. Yes. Mr. Shaw, I just finished reading your book, and it's very, very interesting. But one of the things that's always interested me about Rosco White is the backyard photo, the third one that they found in his possession. I think that's an extraordinary fact. But one of the things that you don't go into it in the book, I mean, for obvious reasons, but one of the things that always intrigued me was some researchers have pointed to Rosco White having photographic kind of expertise or whatever, and have speculated that the body of the supposed Oswald in these photos, all the way up to the top of the chin, is actually that of Rosco White. And some have pointed out that, they never found that set of clothing anywhere in Oswald's possession. And they've done these kind of photographic comparisons of physiques between Rosco White and Lee Harvey Oswald, or Lee Harvey Oswald in the picture and Rosco White elsewhere, like, on the beach or whatever. And I'm just wondering what you think about that. I mean, I've always...
That's Chad, we could have written an 800-page book or 1,000-page book and put that sort of thing in it. The reason that we didn't is primarily we wanted to get the information out, number one, and let people see it and work with it. I hope somebody will take that kind of a study even further. I think Jack White, before he died, did some work in that area. I think Larry Rivera has done some good work in that area. It's definitely a chin difference, and the chin more matches Rosco, and he stands. I've got a photograph of him standing just like that, if you can see this. But
that's the one I was thinking of. That very one is one others have used and compared his physique in that to the one in the backyard photos and said, look, this is more, So
and these two guys, right? This pictures right here is very important. I didn't put it in the book, I don't think, or did I? Maybe I did. This
that is in the book, yes.
okay. This guy right here standing beside Rosco is this picture right here. This is a guy who's all connected to the ONI out of Guantanamo Bay and assassination, and to Morales and that whole ZR rifle project.
So Paul's got his hand up, and then Greg.
Is that me, Larry?
Yeah.
Hey, Paul.
Gary, I heard, over the years, I understood that you had somehow disappeared from public discourse. I don't know if that's true or not, but I just would like to ask you if you were ever intimidated by anybody that caused you to back off from being in the public sphere.
Paul, I'm 5'4", and I intimidate people. I'm the intimidator. Joking. I scare them, don't I, Larry?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Look, you got Chad to call you Mr. Shaw.
When
Well, you're saying no. The answer is no. Nobody intimidated you?
No, I'm too dumb to be intimidated.
Well, let me ask one other quick question.
I'll tell you this. I did lay off of all of this for several years after the Crenshaw trial. I mean, when you go through something like that, you're ready to hang it up for a while, and I did for several years.
Well, I have one other quick question, if I may. I read your book, and you talked about Jerry Hall a lot in your book, and you're the only person I've heard talk about him. Is he? What was your thought about him today, as far as his role in the assassination?
Who now?
Jerry Hall.
Gary
Hall.
No,
Dallas
I don't.
Police. Dallas Police.
All right, let's go on.
Yeah, never mind.
There was Jerry Hill, Sergeant Jerry Hill, I think.
Yeah,
Maybe Hill.
Yeah, I didn't talk about, not in this book.
No, the original cover-up book.
Cover-up, yes, yeah. Jerry Hill's always been suspicious to me, yes.
In what way? Can you explain it quickly?
I got real well acquainted with Patrick Dean, and Dean wanted to tell me something before he died, but he didn't.
Okay, so Greg, and then Charles, and then Walter.
Yes, I have read the book, Gary. Very interesting. I suppose the unfortunate thing is that, along with a lot of other things in relation to the assassination, documents and evidence has mysteriously disappeared, e.g. FBI. A couple of questions. Any further information on who C. Bowers might be?
I'm working in that area right now. I've got a lead of a Commander Bowers that I'm trying to follow up on. I will tell you that.
And the other one, at the bottom of those documents, there's, I think, the word destroy. The assumption being that White should have destroyed those documents?
I think that's right. I think it got him into a lot of trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Charles, and then Walter, and then Frank, and then Carl, and then I guess we got to wrap it up because it's 9:17. Gary's been more than generous with his time tonight.
Hello, wait, is it me?
Yeah, you're up. Yes, Charles.
Okay, Gary,
Charles.
see you in person, kind of.
Yeah, how you doing?
I apologize. It may not be much of a question, but your discovery of Doris Duke, I want to make sure you know that was a major breakthrough for me in the research I've been doing, and that has allowed me to understand a tremendous amount of information that my great uncle gave me when he was dying on his deathbed. He had purposely moved across the street from the Reynolds family here in Richmond, Virginia, which Doris Duke, from my research, she owned Reynolds Metals.
Yeah.
And he had told me it wasn't a coincidence. He moved here for a reason. And it must have been about 1983, and it was a different story. But my dad also worked in naval intelligence, and I believe he got the job because of his uncle, my great uncle. And he pointed across the street and talked about the crimes that they had done. And he said, they're not in prison because wealthy people don't pay for their crimes. And now all these years later, that's just coming in to settle. So mostly, hello, Gary. I just
All right.
want to hello and thank you for everything.
Well, thank you. And we're pursuing that angle. Why in the world would Rosco White from Arkansas put Doris Duke's picture in a book about the assassination?
From 1941, no less.
Especially because he looks like a
19
guy, you know. I thought you were going to say because it was going to be Ruth Payne, but that's another story. Walter, Frank, and then Carl. And
All
then
right.
wrap it up.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, Walter.
I have a question also about that third photograph.
Mhm.
What fascinates me about that is that, correct me if I'm wrong, when the Dallas police reenacted Oswald taking that photo or the picture in the back, it was a duplicate of the third photo that Roscoe had.
That's right, that pose.
And then there was a white, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was also a white cutout, I believe.
Yeah, there's an Officer Brown that posed in that same pose and then had cut him out of that particular photograph. It's his farm that they used to form the cutout. It's a strange story. A book could be written, I think, about the photographs.
Definitely, but do you think there's anything sinister about that cutout, or just
And I think Roscoe probably was involved in that.
yeah? You think he was? Did you think Roscoe was involved maybe with the original photo taken?
It appears that he was working in that photo lab and making duplicates of photographs and doing stuff like that. And actually, Marina said there was a fourth photograph. I don't know whether you know about that or not, but she said there was one of Lee holding the rifle over his head.
Oh,
of course, that's never appeared anywhere, and probably never will.
But she started out saying she took one photograph, right? Then it went to two, and
But Geneva, by the way, and Ricky and the family said that Roscoe had pictures that he had created of the boys flying through the air. He had his own darkroom at his house, and so he was involved in photography in some way.
interesting.
okay. Carl, you're up.
Okay.
Hi,
Once again, it's a fascinating program tonight. Gary, it's a pleasure to see you in person. And I do have your new book, Admitted Assassin, and have seen a number of your videos and other things. But you had mentioned a Mr. Coley earlier. Is that the fellow that worked at the Dallas Morning News?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was always fascinated by his recollection of taking a news photographer over to Dealey Plaza right after the assassination, same day, and finding a pool of blood at the top of those stairs on the west side of the plaza and photographing it. And then later, purportedly, a couple of FBI agents show up and confiscate the photos. You know, there's so many questions that brings up, like whose blood was it? I just wanted to see what your thoughts were about that whole episode.
Well, the thing that Ricky and Tricia both remembered in the diary, Roscoe talks about coming around the fence and taking a man down. Now, what does that mean? Did he hit him in the nose and knock him down? Did he hit him over the head, or did he shoot him? You know, I don't know. But the fact that there was blood there, the guy actually stuck his finger in the blood and tasted of it and said, "It's blood." And that's when they took the picture. This is right at the top of the steps. This is not back further, like some believe, over near the little settee or the little bench that was back there, where the people are said to have broken a bottle of pop soda, and that's what the blood was. It really wasn't blood. You know, Jean Hill said it was blood. She saw that as she ran up the hill. I don't know whether you remember that or not in her testimony. And they told her it was a snow cone, I think.
Wow.
In one of the Willis slides, you can see somebody, you know, actually laying down on one of those steps. So I don't know if that had anything to do with what Coley observed or not, but it was sort of interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So
we don't know what that man was doing, who it was. It's just in the diary that he came around the fence and had to take a man down. And what that taking a man down, that could mean a number of things.
Right, Rico, you were up and then you're down, your hands back up, and I guess you'll have to be the
Yeah,
last.
sorry. Thank you, Larry. Mr. Shaw, I read Henry Hurt's book. This might be going back a long time. First of all, is he still with us?
Yes, I
Mr.
talked to
Hurt?
him recently.
Oh,
Okay.
Still in touch.
He mentions you found a FBI document that seemed to contradict an exact same document that talked about the bag that with which Lee Harvey Oswald carried the rifle in. And the second document you found said it did not match the paper at the Texas School Book Depository. Mr. Hurt talked with the actual FBI agent, but didn't reach any conclusions. Have you reached any conclusions, and what does that mean to the case anyway?
It means that the first document that they had was a problem because it said that the paper didn't match.
Right.
This is the paper that was allegedly taken from the school book depository rolls with the tape, and Oswald was supposedly made this long bag to carry the rifle into the school book depository. Problem with that bag is, you know, he's supposed to have ripped the paper off, folded it up, taken it home with him, put it back together, folded it back up, taken it back up there, and yet they found one small fingerprint on that after doing all of that, you know.
It's no picture of it.
No picture of it. And it was accidentally destroyed in testing, you know. It's a stupid one of those, again, those stupid things that flare up in this case.
Well,
thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Gary. I think Larry's about to wrap it up, but I wanted to also say that there's some wonderful recordings that and interviews that Geneva did that supports this story. And I really urge you guys to get a copy of the book and provide any feedback if you have any insights. And Bob, thanks for handling the photography and the documents for us.
Hey, it's been a pleasure, Dan. Thank you. Thank you, Larry. And tell Jeff thank you. And it's good to be with you guys. And let's keep on keeping on.
So, you know, it's almost 9:30. We still have over 70 people on. So this shows you what a treasure you are and how people feel about you. And we are so blessed that you, and Dan, thank you for arranging this. Hopefully you haven't finished. And hopefully and more importantly, hopefully you've inspired other people to follow up on the tracks that you have left.
This is still important, guys. Yeah. Still important.
There was 79 at its peak, Larry.
79, okay. And Bob Saltzman, you've known Gary a very long time. Before we hang up, do you want to just share how you guys know each other?
Well, we met through Bud Fensterwald. I became a member of the organization that Gary spoke to, which ultimately was the Committee to Investigate Assassinations. And I met Bud in May of 1970 doing a large computer project for the CTIA, and flew down to Dallas and met with Penn Jones, and I think at times Mae Brussel and Mary Farrell. And somewhere along the way, Gary and I started chatting each other up, and he has been my mentor unknowingly and inspiration for 5+ decades. So I'm indebted to him. We chat. We have a mutual friend in Robert Groden, and I won't go any farther than that. So So anything that you can read, if you can find, by the way, I don't know, since your book cover-up was self-published, whether this impacts you financially, but if you look hard enough, you might find a PDF version of the book in archives.org or places like that. People have captured it over the years, but I really recommend it. When I reached out to Gary after I read his book about 6 months ago, again for the first time, the word that came to mind that I shared with him was brilliant.
We should figure out a way to see whether we could get another print edition of that. I don't know, Gary, what kind of copyrights exist. That was published in 76, you said?
That's right.
Did you do that with a contract?
I actually had it typeset. We couldn't get a publisher. We were turned down by a dozen, I guess. And so I physically had it typeset, pasted it up myself, and had it printed. So it was.
So you still have the rights to it then?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Oh, okay. Well, Bob, we'll have to talk about that offline. Maybe there's a.
Yeah, I think if folks here search around a bit, they probably already have discovered that there were subsequent reprints, or other than first edition, that I've seen around that have a different cover. I don't know Gary's story about that, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But I think the first edition has collector's cachet. Subsequent editions may be what people want, which is information.
By the way, can I close with this?
Yes.
Bob, when I met Bob, it was at the 1973 decade of assassinations that Bud Fensterwall put on there in Georgetown University in Washington. And for the first time, we saw the Grodin Zapruder film, and it was shown by Bob. And it knocked you flat, because we'd been looking at a little old 8mm fuzzy copy of the film, and this was with slow up, rotoscoped and blow ups. But what's funny about that, I just ran across a document that was released with some of these batches that have been released through the years. It's a memo to the FBI director. They covered that symposium, that conference, and they wrote about each speaker. Now, this guess who signed off on that?
Well, I know that story, and
Jack Angleton signed off. He's the one that had it monitored and reported to, wrote up the report on it.
Wow.
The way it's written, it suggests that Angleton actually might have been there in attendance.
Well, he may have been.
But it was a stunning day, because the likes of William Turner and Mark Lane and other people were there in the room, and none of them knew that this version of the Zapruder film existed. Right. So that was a turning point. And Gary was there, and he reminded me, I couldn't recall, but he actually found pictures that he took during that day that have since faded, but I was able to recover some of them. And he has a vivid recollection of that event, which was on the weekend of November 21st, 1973, hence the name Decade of Assassinations. And it took place at the Georgetown University Law School. So again, to people like Gary and Richard Sprague and Mark Lane and all the people who we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Dan, thank you so much for arranging this. Gary, thank you for agreeing, and it's late at night, and thank you for sharing, your wealth of knowledge. And this is really important stuff to get on record. And I guess we'll see you guys next week. But this has been a highlight, I have to say, of our series so far.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Dan, for arranging this, and it's been my pleasure.
Have a good night.
Take care, guys. Thanks.
Good night.